Yes, I have been doing it for about 100 years. So I suppose when you've been around as long as I have, you have the opportunity, which is great, of meeting lots of people and interviewing. You mentioned Cliff and Eamon. Eamon, when I was in Ulster Television, I was doing a nightly programme called Good Evening Ulster, which was a nightly hour-long news programme, which was quite ambitious in those days for a region to do an hour. So when I left, Eamon got my job, so I thought that was a good move for him and for me. And Cliff I've known for 35 years, maybe more than that. He came to Northern Ireland in the very early days of the Troubles, and nobody was doing interviews then, and somehow or other I managed to get the exclusive. So he helped me in my job because BBC Northern Ireland thought, she is relentless, and she got the interview. So when you're young as a broadcaster, as you would know, when you get a scoop, it's a good feeling.
I just love this job because I'm nosy. Meeting people like you is such a thrill because you've all got such interesting stories to tell. Most of them you won't tell me on tape. But presumably that's why you want to make your programme Gloria's great, because you get to meet people who you either already know or would like to meet, and then go in their homes and get the scoop on all the stories that they won't normally tell you. As
you say, it's good to be nosy by nature. Now, being Irish, I don't know whether it's nosiness or whether we just like to talk, but traditionally and culturally, people in Ireland do like that round the fire chatting, generation to generation, all those sort of friendly debates and arguments around the table. We like to sort of be around the table as families and so on. So therefore it's a very good tool to have for a job like this, because I am genuinely interested in people. I like people, and I'm nosy enough to want to know what makes them tick. But the thing I like about doing the Biography Channel series is that it makes 1 hour on air. Now that means in the main, I have to practically live with somebody maybe up to 2 days, and you're recording at least 2 hours of material to make the one. So in the land of soundbite, where you're getting 10 seconds on the news, and if you're lucky on a breakfast programme 3 minutes or something like that, it's an absolute joy from an interviewer's point of view to make an hour-long programme in the end. And you do get a chance to go to areas that you just quite frankly don't get the time to do on other programmes. And I also have a theory that when people are talking to you for a long period of time, they sort of forget that they're doing radio or TV or whatever it is, and they do tell you things that they hadn't intended to tell you. So that's pretty good.
What makes a great interviewer then? How do I become better?
To listen carefully. When I first started, I'm very lucky when I look back now. I was a singer from I was 8, and that's what I was going to be. But through a record that I made in Northern Ireland, I was invited on to the equivalent of the Today programme in Belfast. And the producer there, a senior producer, who actually, in hindsight, which I'll tell you about in a minute, had wonderful foresight, and he was just so futuristic in his attitudes to things. But he offered me the job. He rang me up the next day and he just said, look, you don't seem short of a word or two. Have you ever thought about interviewing? And I went, never, which I never had. I was a singer. So he said, would you be interested? And to cut a long story short, I'm so lucky. I don't think it would happen these days that you just get offered the job. But that has been a repetition in my career, because similarly, I started off with pin money and having been offered the job. So it gives you a different slant. I was never frantic about it because I was never the breadwinner, as I was married with children. So I didn't have that anxiety about how am I going to make the money for the food this week. So I think you come in with a different attitude. And when it came to coming to Radio 2 in London, I wasn't sitting in Northern Ireland saying I've got to get to London. I was just very lucky again in being offered the job to come and stand in for Jimmy Young. But therein is the luck, because the girl who normally stood in for him was away on holiday herself. So they were looking for somebody. Then I was offered everything else that followed. So it's like even heaven and earth right up to this day. I didn't have to go looking for it. I was offered it. Now, having said luck is probably 95% of it, the other 5% you have to be challenged enough and ambitious enough to want to make it work, and I do. I'm not ambitious in that I'm striving to get to America, for example, but I am ambitious enough that whatever I decide to tackle, I want to do it to the best of my ability and to hold on to it.
Do you enjoy what you do still?
My family say to me sometimes, why don't you ease off and go and sit on the beach in France somewhere for a few months and enjoy yourself in that sense? And I say to them, I am enjoying myself. I really love the job. I've always loved it. And I think the day and hour that I don't like it anymore, or it gives me up, which is, another possibility, then it will be the time to say, well, what am I going to do? But for the moment, I really enjoy it. I have, eased off in terms of, that I prioritise a bit better now. I'm a bit better in not saying yes to everything. And that includes charity things and other functions, because for a long time I don't think no was in my vocabulary. So with the result, I was like rushing every second of the day, this, that and that. I mean, apart from my work, it was like every charity do and every opening night. And I'm a bit more discerning about that. But apart from that, I still want to do it, and I intend to do it for as long as I can.
Which side of the microphone would you rather be on, this side or that side?
I've learned to be on both now, because at the beginning I found it very odd to be interviewed, because I was used to being in charge and what questions I'd ask and what areas I'd go to. But particularly since I wrote the book about my daughter Caron, I've been interviewed about it a lot, and it has taught me to be on the other side. So I actually don't mind now. I quite like the other side as well. The first day I went in to do my very, very first interview, it was about meteorites. Now, what I knew about meteorites, you could write on a pinprick, literally. But I had studied it hard. I had looked up every book that I had in the house, and I had a long list of questions that would see me through any interview. And so when I went in to do this interview live, round the table, a la Today programme, beforehand he said to me, what are these? And I went, well, they're my questions. And he said, let me have a look. And he tore them up. I was horrified. And he just said, listen, this will never work as an interviewer. The first lesson you must learn is you have to listen, because by the time you get to question 7, this person might have answered it in question 2. And he said, unless you really get into what they're saying and be prepared to go off on a tangent, he said, you'll never make a good interviewer. So he taught me a very valuable lesson. And so now we spin to your question about the yep, nope side of it. You don't actually come across that many, but the most famous one that I ever had was Robert Mitchum. And I was doing a programme called Sunday. And I remember meeting Michael Parkinson at a film screening, as you tend to have to go, obviously have to go and see the films in advance if you're doing big interviews. And he said to me, who have you got this week on Sunday? And I was saying Robert Mitchum. So he clearly interviewed him a lot. And he said, you do know that he's not the best interviewee in the world? I said, yeah, I know. But in my head, at the same time, I'm thinking, but I'll have done my research and I'll know the question to ask. Well, of course, when Mitchum came on the set, he was such an amazingly imposing figure of a man, and being a movie buff, I'd seen him in every film practically that he'd made. But he was of the yep, nope variety. Well, of course, any interviewer panics like hell if there's a silence for 10 seconds. But what I had to learn to do in that case was, of course, to listen. At the time, I wasn't listening to very much. But I had to learn to zipper my mouth, which would be a good thing, many people would say, and wait for him then to come up with the answer, because I'm fast in delivery, because that's just the way we speak in Northern Ireland, but he, of course, drawls. So I had to learn to sit back and not jump in with the next question. And, of course, by the end of the interview, as you say, when you're beginning to get into a rhythm, then I got the measure of his pace. But he probably still wasn't the best interviewee in the world.
Who was the best that you've ever interviewed?
It's hard to say. I mean, that's like saying what's your favourite, there are many people who are great. Prince Philip, for example, if you get him on the right day, is amazing. He's just really interesting, largely because of who he is and largely because he is a feisty character. Cliff Richard, whom we mentioned before, Cliff is a dream to interview. I always used to, on any day I was interviewing him, relax, because I'd say, it doesn't matter what you ask Cliff, you could ask him about the window or that building over there, and he would have an answer for it. He's a very giving person, both in reality as an individual and as an interviewee. He can talk about anything. He could do a mastermind and nearly everything. So he is a real joy to interview. There are people I've really loved interviewing because I've always wanted to. I was going to be Doris Day when I was growing up, so therefore when I got the opportunity to interview her in 93, I just couldn't believe that I was kicking sand with Doris Day in California. I just thought, if you told me when I was watching all those movies in Northern Ireland when I was growing up that one day I'd kick sand with her, I just would never have been able to take that on board. So I've been very lucky in interviewing people whom I've really admired on film, and to interview people like Leslie Caron, for example, whom I called my Caron after, spelt the name that way, to interview people like Kirk Douglas and all those major, beefy male, very important male stars. It was fantastic.
And my final question in interviewing, is there anyone left who you still want to interview who is alive and it might be possible one day?
I'd like to interview Gordon Brown currently about inheritance tax. I really would like to interview him. But I'd love to interview Bono. You know, I did Bono's very first interview on Ulster Television years and years ago. And I met him at an airport not that long ago, and he reminded me of that. But I've never been able to quite click into interviewing him these days. He's always off in America or Africa and world tour or whatever. But I think he's really interesting because I love their music, and I think he's really trying to make a contribution to the world. And I think that I feel that he's such an intelligent man who spends so much of his energy trying to understand other situations and other people and to help other people. I'd really like to talk to him.
And he's one of those people that doesn't need to do it. He's got enough going on in his life. He's not doing it because he's not busy.
Well, absolutely. And the trouble is that he is always busy. But one of these days I'll catch him up.
We'll talk about your childhood now, because I can't imagine you were a shrinking violet.
You're not wrong. When I look back now, because you don't realise at the time when you're a small child that this is not, in a way, the norm. But I had an amazing childhood. First of all, I was so fortunate that I had a set of parents who made me feel loved all the time. On reflection, I have never doubted that I was loved and cherished at any point in my life. And at my stage in my 60s, that's a great gift to have. My father was a newspaper man by day, but he was a part-time magician by night. How magical was that for a child? And my mother was a stay-at-home mum because she lived with a very macho Irishman, and Ireland was very macho at that point anyway. The attitude was, no wife of mine is going to work. I'm the breadwinner. I will look after my family. But she was of the nature that she accepted that. And she was just such a lovely, jolly, biggish woman, comforting to come home to, always smiling, always ready with a joke and a fast line, and was the most wonderful baker. So she had cake tins that were full of the most delicious stuff all of the time. Now, mind you, I was only 7'2" then, so what does that tell you? I wish I had my mother's cooking now. But you know, my favourite smell to this day is the smell of baking bread, fresh bread, because on a Saturday she would have made 13 or 14 different types of bread, which she would distribute around the neighbours and so on and share. But, you know, as a child, everybody wanted to come to our house because my dad did tricks. And my mum fed them from the cake tins, so it was a great combination. But when I was about 6 or 7, and of course I was well used to going to the concert, and I was fascinated watching my dad do all the magic, but at the same time wanted to be one of those girl singers who used to come from Belfast to do all the concerts, because it was homespun entertainment then, pre-television, I hate to admit it, but it was big business. It was 3, 4, 5 nights a week, church halls, community halls, schools, all that kind of thing. And I started to say to my dad, I want to do this. And so I must have had a reasonable voice. And he sent me to the pianist of the Mid-Ulster Variety Group, which he performed with. And she taught me my songs. But this will amuse you, being the young lad you are. We used to queue up on a Saturday morning to get the sheet music as it was delivered to the shop. And then we'd buy up the sheet music for a shilling or whatever it was. And then I'd go to the pianist and she would teach me the song. Whatever song I'd been listening to on the radio, whatever song was popular at that time, she would teach me the song. And so it was simple stuff, naive stuff, innocent stuff. But it was great. I can't believe, having had children of my own and subsequently grandchildren, that I was out 3 and 4 nights a week till 1, 2 in the morning, and then getting up and going to school and doing my homework. But it didn't seem to do me any harm. My mother would have waited up for us to come home. I could always see her reflection in the window, because she'd wait watching for us to come back, and she'd always make tea and sandwiches. She'd have it all ready for us and get me ready for bed. So it was a different childhood in that sense, but taught me so much. And then when I was 17 going on 18, I wanted to go to Canada. I was obsessed by going to Canada. So that gave me my first taste of broadcasting. And I used to stand on a chair in our kitchen singing into a big Bakelite radio on the wall, because I thought in my naive state as a child that if I could hear them, they could hear me. I used to spend hours singing into this speaker on the thing and waiting for somebody to say, hey you, singing A, you're adorable, B, you're so beautiful, we want you because you've got the X factor. But of course it never happened. But you know, so there was this great mystique and mystery about the BBC. And of course it would have been the light service and the home service then. That's all the choice we had. But to actually go then to Canada and find 8 radio stations and 6 television stations in this one small city, and the fact that if I could sing an Irish song and tune, which I could, I was on, so I did television and radio, ended up getting my own little 15-minute radio program doing Irish requests because of the immigrant population. And so it was a great eye-opener and my introduction to radio and TV. So then when I came back, I really came back not intending to stay in Ireland at all. I wanted to go back to Canada because I loved it, and it was the best horizon broadener I could have had, because I lived in entrenched Northern Ireland, Catholics one end of the town, Protestants the other. Went to Canada and saw that all these cultures and nationalities lived together, pulled together. Nobody ever asked you what religion you were. So that was the best horizon broadener I could have had as an individual. But then came back intending to return to Canada, and that was going to make my home there. But my dad had seen, very cleverly, he'd seen an ad in the newspaper for Ulster Television, which had opened up, and it was for a production assistant. So he said, why don't you apply? And in my head at 18, I went, well, if I get this job, I'm meant to stay, and if I don't, I'm meant to go back to Canada. But I got the job and I stayed.
Do you think your story could happen today with the way the media is, that you could have that natural talent and then get on the radio and then end up on the TV and be sat here all these years later?
In a word, no. There might be the vague possibility. I mean, I've always said to young people wanting to go into broadcasting, you have to be keen as mustard to do it. You have to be dedicated to it. You have to know what you want to do. And if you have that focus, and in fact, with the Glorious Greats that I'm doing, the one common denominator that really comes out with great people who've managed to survive in their business is the focus and the dedication to that job, whatever that job is, whether you're an actor, a singer, or a broadcaster. And you have to get that focus early on. Now, in many ways, in my case, I didn't have the focus originally, but when I was offered the opportunity, my focus is straight as a die, because I want to succeed at whatever that is. But I don't think it would happen so much. I mean, it's become a very competitive, tough business. But having said that, it's diversified so much into so many channels and so many outlets that in some ways, if you are dedicated and if you do apply yourself enough, you maybe have a better opportunity to get a job in production or as a presenter or whatever it is you want to do. The worst thing you can do, and I remember a very high up executive at London Weekend Television telling me this. He was boarding for a researcher job on my Sunday programme, and he had 500 applications for this one researcher's job, most of whom were university graduates. And I said to him, how do you ever choose out of that? Because they're all qualified, all interested in the job. And he said, well, this is how it goes. The person comes in and I go, what do you know about our company and what we do? And they go, oh, not really. I don't really know what programs you do. And he said, immediately I rule them out. So first of all, you have to know the company you want to work for, or at least what that company does if you're applying. The next question I might say to the next person is, what is it you'd like to do in television? Why do you want to be in television? Oh, I don't know. I just want to be in television. It looks like a really glamorous job. He said, I eliminate them straight away. I want to hear people saying, I want to be a director. I want to be a presenter. Now, I know I've got to be a T-boy to begin with. I know I've got to be a runner, but I want to do that long term. That's what I want to hear. So that's what everybody wants to hear. No matter what job you're applying for, whether you're a secretary or whether you want to be in TV, you've got to know something about the company you're applying to and what you want to do long term and how you might get there.
Gloria, what are you? You're a great journalist, but I don't think if you said Gloria Hunniford, people would say that. I think they'd say you're a nice person, firstly, and they'd say that you're a smiley person that's good to watch on the TV.
Well, I cut my teeth in Northern Ireland on news and current affairs. The reason that I didn't stay in that when I came here was that Jimmy Young had that sewn up. I then moved into entertainment. Having said that, I'm very happy with that, because I also, in Northern Ireland, although it was a news-based programme we were doing at 6 o'clock in the evening, we also did entertainment. So I've always had that balance going. But it's funny, what goes around comes around, because now that I'm doing Heaven and Earth, that programme is based in morals, ethics and a base of religion. You only have to lift a newspaper, look at a news bulletin. The world is dominated now by those three subjects: morals, ethics and religion. So now I'm having the opportunity to talk about the newsy items that crop up. So I think that I'm able, in this programme in particular, to show the balance of stuff that I can do, and I'm getting the opportunity to do hard interviews. But I don't mind the tag, because, I have wanted to to remain in broadcasting. And I also think that in order to stay in broadcasting, possibly as long as I have, because people say again, how do you stay in a job that you like? You have to be prepared to branch off, and you have to be prepared to go with the flow. But I've never done a job that I never wanted to do or hated doing. I'm not motivated by money, but I like to get the right money for the job. But you have to be prepared to go sideways sometimes as well. Because if you're being realistic, you know that if you want to stay in this business for 40, 50 years, that you're not always going to have peak time on a Saturday night. I've had my times, peak time, Friday, Saturday night. But in those days, people said, daytime television will never catch on. Yes, of course it caught on. I joined Channel 5 at a time when it was slightly regarded in the evening as being soft porn. My agent said, why would you join Channel 5? And I went, they've given me a clean sheet to do whatever programme I want. Open House ran for 5 years. It was a great opportunity, and subsequently everything developed, and now everybody's keen to work for Channel 5. So broadcasting and the industry has changed so much. But in a lot of cases, I was in on the ground level of a lot of things and prepared to go with it. But I've never done programmes that I wasn't interested in and didn't want to do.
Is there one programme you've done that you're most proud of?
If I could relive the programmes, I would say that I would revive Sunday Sunday. Because Sunday Sunday was a great chat programme. Not great because I was doing it, obviously, but great because it had the most wonderful production team. We got every major Hollywood star that you could ever dream of, and more than I ever dreamt of. I did it for 9 years, but it wasn't a fully networked programme. It was based in London. But it was a really special era of just great names, great production values. And I would love to relive that period, and I'd love to revive that programme. Out of everything, I would love a chat programme, and that would be the format that I would do.
Are you still starstruck?
To a degree, yes, but not enough to put me off doing my job. The only one time I have ever lost the sentence in my head or the question that I was going to ask was interviewing Omar Sharif on Sunday Sunday. And I remember thinking, those eyes are just the way they were in Dr. Zhivago. The biggest, brownest eyes, literally like the old poetry goes, pools, wells. And I remember being absolutely transfixed and suddenly realised he'd stopped talking, and I had no idea what I was going to say, but my stock phrases. Now, the other thing I was going to ask you, while I'm frantically thinking what was I going to ask, but that was the only time I think that I was really stuck and had to think very fast on my feet.
Have you got one filler question in case you ever do go blank that you always pull out?
Not really, because as I mentioned before, I was taught very early on to really listen, and I do listen. So there's always something that somebody says that will allow you to go off on a different tangent. Well, let me ask you about that. And so not. And I'm actually, everybody has their own system as to how they work. I don't look at my notes all the time, but I make notes to myself that are just trigger points so that if I need to look down, I can. Because I've observed people over the years, you ask them a question, then they tend to look away and look around the audience and look around, and while they're looking around, I can look at the next thing. So you just develop your own techniques. There's no right or wrong way of doing it, but it's a system that works for yourself.
It seems like these days people come and go so quickly in entertainment and show business. How have you managed to stay around so long?
Well, going back on some of the things we talked about, I've always been really interested in the job, and again, I've been very fortunate enough to have programmes that have cropped up that do have something new to say. And I suppose because I've been prepared to do new things all the time, I also have something new to talk about. It's not like I'm still stuck in the same programme for the last 25 years and have done nothing. I did do Strictly Come Dancing last year, which I think is the best reality TV show. So that was new for me to do, as a new talking point. I have just taken on Heaven and Earth in the last year. That is a new talking point. I do have new talking points in terms of my own life and my grandchildren. So I guess it's not any major plan, but I think just by accident, there are always some new things to say. And I do get involved in many different campaigns as well, because I do think you have to put back a bit. I've just been recently involved in trying to make sure that the elderly are warm and safe. Maybe that's because I know it'll not be that long till I be there. But I like to get involved in community things too.
One of the things we've got to talk about is Caron, who was one of our greatest presenters who we lost, and you wrote the book about her, which I've just found riveting. Firstly, why did you need to write that? Was it to help other people, like you were just saying?
I didn't start off with that in mind at all, but actually the book sold 600,000 copies, and the paperback at the moment is up to about 150, 160,000. Now, I could never have anticipated that, and it wasn't written for that reason. But the book has taken on a life of its own, largely through Caron's own writing. So it's quite interesting. I couldn't have known that at the beginning, because you're never sure how a book is going to turn out. All I knew was that I had 3 reasons for writing it, and I did think long and hard before I did it. I wanted to pay tribute to this glorious, feisty, intelligent, wonderful girl with the most incredible and unique sense of humour that I've ever come across, whom I was very lucky to know for 41 years. I wanted to pay tribute to her in my own style. I also wanted to finish what she had started. She'd started to write 2 books. We find them. Russ gave me her journals afterwards. They weren't chronological in diary form, but they were a lot of thought processes and writings and jottings. And it became very clear that she was writing 2 books. One about her upbringing in Ireland, the quirkiness of that, the fun of it, and a kind of a sidelong. And Caron always had a great sidelong way of looking at things anyway, which is one thing I adored about her. And I wanted to finish that off. But most important of all, I wanted to have her story between covers for her 2 boys. And I felt a real sense of completion. I sort of felt after I finished it that if I was run over by a bus, which I hope I never get, but the next day, that I know that the story is there for them as and when they want to read it. It's not a book for them now, but there will come a point in their lives when they want to know what happened to their mum, why did she die, what was she like as a child, what was she like growing up. Because all the research tells me that young children, they're 12 and 10 now, and they've grown up a lot in the last 2 years since Caron died, but research shows you that when children are young, as long as they're well loved, which they are, well looked after, which they are, happy at their school, have their friends, have a lot of fun in their lives, which they do, that they get by. The trouble or problems set in, or are likely to set in, when they're in their teens, when mum is not there for graduation day, when mum is not there in the big sports days, when mum's not there to see, in this case, Charlie getting the cup for football, which he loves. And then I'm told the questions arise. When they're older and have children of their own, they want to show their children to both their parents. And that's a natural feeling to have. So I know this book is there for them. And Penguin, who published it, did a great thing for me. They had a leather-bound copy made for Charlie and for Gabriel. And they had printed in the first page of the book Charlie's special edition or Gabriel's special edition, which is a real treasure to have. So, I mean, that is fantastic. So I'm going to do memory boxes for them. I'm in the process of gathering all the things together. And I'm going to put in that, the paperback, the hardback, and their special edition, alongside all the other things that they might like. People have been very kind since Caron died and have sent me videos that maybe, there's one fan of hers, like a boy called Kevin. And Kevin seems to have kept everything. So he has sent me things like Radio Times, with Caron in the front cover, videos that he has kept, photographs that he's had, letters from her that he had. So I'm going to put all of these into the box so that eventually they'll always have that, and maybe one day they'll sift through it.
How do you begin to recover? Presumably of all the tragedies, that has to be one of the hardest, because you never expect as a parent your child will go before you. It
is the worst thing that can happen to you in life, and I now know there's no healing from it. I've lost parents, I have lost friends, I've lost a former husband, and I'm not undermining any grief at all, because grief is relative to the person who's going through it at that time. But I know that you recover eventually from losing a partner. Not easy. And when you meet another partner, it's not the same. You may not love them as much, or you might even love them more, who knows. But you do find another way of living with another partner. I know that there's no way you recover from losing a child. You can't replace that child, and you wouldn't want to. So I know that I will mourn Caron's loss for the rest of my life. I know I will. But what does happen is you gather enough strength to find ways to live in and around it, because you have no option. There comes a point in the middle of your incredible grief that you think to yourself, I might sit and cry here for the rest of my life. And then you think, I have other sons, I have grandchildren, I have a husband. I have to try and pull myself together for them. And so slowly you begin to inch your way back to maybe what you deem as a bit of normality. But life is never the same. I know I'll never be the same person I was before I lost Caron. I can't be, because that element of carefreeness will never come back. Because it can't, because I'm missing. I have this huge void in my life of this child I carried and gave birth to. So therefore, life can never be the same. But people have very kindly sent letters, and I live by letters from people whom I've never met and probably never will meet. A woman wrote to me 2 weeks after Caron died, and she said, I lost my son 17 years ago, and she said, I'd like to tell you it'll get better, but it won't. At the time I thought, how harsh is this letter? Will I never feel marginally better than how I feel at the minute? But she was right in that there is no healing, as I mentioned. But other people have said things, like a woman wrote a very profound letter, which I've read and reread many, many times. And she said to me in the midst of this early grief, she said, you now have to look at ways to carry Caron's spirit forward. She said, Caron had a big soul. And remember that her soul is bigger than death, and death is never the end. As a direct result of that letter, we set up the Caron Keating Foundation in memory of Caron, which helps cancer charities of all sorts. And that's been the most wonderful healing for certain aspects of it, thing to do, because I know Caron would be very proud of it. She would be bowled over and amazed by the Caron Keating treatment rooms that we've supported. She would be amazed to know that, so many people are being helped in her name. And subsequently, that really helps me in my aspect of healing, because it's a positive thing to do against the background of something so negative. And we've helped all sorts of people. Our philosophy is we have no administrators. I open every letter because all those letters come to me. I know what people want and need. I know how much money we have, and I know how to dish it out. And I don't do bricks and mortar that are going to cost millions of pounds. I do smaller projects where I'm hands-on. I know how the money is being spent. I go to see how it's being spent in some cases. I went to North London recently to see a Caron Keating treatment room. I know Caron would be thrilled that inside this room so many people are being treated daily in complementary therapies that help in dealing with cancer. I went to the launch of the big bus in Northern Ireland recently, which is a 56-foot bus that expands when it's parked up. It can go to any housing estate, factory yard, go anywhere. And the aspect there that really interested me was the fact that we're going to pay for a radiographer to screen young girls, because the National Health will breast screen women of 50 plus up to 65, but this bus will screen young girls from 30 to 50. That's the category Caron was in. So what a very practical thing to do in Caron's memory. And that's going to be a thing of the future. So the spread of how we help people is huge, and it's very mending.
I think the only thing I can say about the book, having read it, is that you just wanted to give you a hug. Oh. That's how it made me feel. Give
me a hug before you finish then.
I would be delighted to. How are the boys?
The boys are in really good form. I'm taking them to France for the day tomorrow. They're growing up, of course. One of them, Charlie, is mad about sport, mad about it. So he plays sport after school every day. So I have to learn how to tap into that. Gone are the days of when they were young, they could come and stay for 5 days at a time because they weren't at school. So I have to grow with them, and I now pick them up from school sometimes, but I take them bowling or take them to the movies. I have to find new things to do with them as they get older. But tomorrow, I say, we're going to France for the day, and they'll love that. And I say we go to the movies a lot, and I love them coming over to my house, but they can only come, in half terms, for long periods, or during holiday time. We go down to Cornwall maybe for a week at a time, things like that. So it's really good. And I have other grandchildren as well. My son has got 2 lovely boys as well, and so they're getting bigger. And my husband Stephen has got 4 grandchildren on his side, so we've got 8 altogether between us. 1 girl, 7 boys. So we're working our way towards the football team. But they're great, and they seem as happy as they can be. And we talk about Caron a lot. It's hard for me to find ways to talk about it naturally without bringing it up, in a forced way. But, Charlie's very good at art, and so indeed is Gabriel. So I'll say, well, Mummy would be so pleased with that. And sometimes we find her artwork, and we look at her artwork, and I might also say, Mum would be really proud of you. So I try to bring it up in natural ways. And they do talk about her a lot. And also because of the foundation, I brought them to a foundation event this year. We did a strictly tea dancing event. So I thought that would be fun for them, nothing too heavy, and they would enjoy it, which they did. And through the Variety Club of Great Britain, we give an award every year to young talent in Caron's name. And my ambition is that eventually they will hand that award over. So I really want them to get involved, because I think that would be good for them to know, although they've lost their mum, and I know how sad they are about that, but it'd be good for them to know how the foundation in her name is helping other people.